Welcome to Critical Hit, a Major Spoilers podcast. Thank you for downloading and checking us out this week. Here's something we haven't done in a long time.
What's
mailbag. Mailbag.
Mail time.
Oh, here's one. Hey, due to inclement weather, your kid's school will be closed tomorrow. God dang it. God dang it.
Well, faithful spoilerites.
Top that off with a kid that's been sick for 2 days this week, and my productivity has gone way in the toilet. But hey, speaking of productivity, let me ask you guys a question. What do you think should be the proper ratio between GM time and player time?
Ooh. How do you mean?
Well, the amount of time that the GM spends talking and the amount of time that the players spend doing their interactions, their ramblings, their ruminations, their role-playing, their dice rolls, all of that stuff.
I don't...
I mean, it depends on the situation. I think one of the biggest, most important skills a GM can learn, honestly, is when to sit back and let the players do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if the players are the GM's there to guide the action, and there's sometimes where that's going to take, a literal round by round approach, like if it's a combat, or sometimes it's going to be dominated by a GM when they have to set up a scene or introduce a bunch of NPCs or something like that. But, I think that the whole Fire Time story thing was a great example of Rodrigo kind of giving a prompt and saying, all right, everybody, do your thing.
Mm-hmm. But let's say in an hour-long episode, how much time do you think the GM should be talking?
I don't know that there's a hard and fast ratio.
Exactly.
I think it depends on the game. It depends on the players. It also depends on the nature of any given episode. I mean, we've had episodes where Rodrigo does the bulk of the narrative, and it's amazing. Mm-hmm. And then we've had episodes where he just goes, adventure hook, go idiots. Mm-hmm. And it still can be amazing. So, I mean, that's like when people say to me, you're 48 years old, you should have $24,000 in the bank. And I'm like, well, first of all, here's my middle finger. And second of all, upon what would you even base this theoretical metric?
Well, and the important thing to remember is that the majority of role-playing games are going to be some sort of narrative, some sort of story. And if you look at any given medium, and let's say, for example, comics, because I think that's a good example of showing versus telling, chances are the first volume or the first issue of your story, if you have a 6-issue miniseries or a 12-issue series or something, is probably going to have a lot of exposition, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe some in media res stuff immediately followed by exposition. And so when you look at role-playing games, that's all game master stuff. There's very little exposition that the players can give you unless the game master has seeded that into the players and then sets up a situation for them to give that exposition. So if you think of, especially if you're listening to a show like Critical Hit, any given episode is going to have just insanely varying amounts of my talking to other people talking, because there are going to be episodes in which I have to set up a lot of things, and then there are going to be episodes in which I'm trying to force the players to talk to each other, or just set it up for the players to talk to each other, and that's all the episode is, because that is an issue in which, I don't know, Rogue and Jean Grey are in the Savage Land and they are separated from everybody else, right? It's well, we spent a whole issue talking about what the Savage Land was. Now here they're actually fighting dinosaurs.
Any thoughts, Brian?
I don't know. I'd say maybe just hopefully 2-to-1, two players
50,
to 1.
Yeah, 50-50 is kind of, it's got to be a balance over time.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to look at it over time and say, okay, well, this really works well in this case. I guess the idea from this question is, and they don't go into any kind of detail, but my guess is there's a GM or a player that seems to be dominating the entire game, and they want to know, hey, at what point are we just sitting back and listening to the GM ramble for 2 hours, and we get 1 or 2 dice rolls in the time?
But that's like somebody jumping a sidewalk and running someone over and saying, how do we make cars safer? It's well, the real question is, why is this person jumping onto the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Right.
Like rather than mathematically trying to determine how much somebody should talk.
Okay. Here's one from John who says, this is an old one. I don't know if we've answered this one before. I really love how real and rich Rodrigo and Sam made the Southern Continent and Legacy of Ghost. It really felt like another world outside of the Central Continent. I wanted to ask, how did Rodrigo and Sam come up with the lingo/slang? Like how a guy getting priced is getting him killed.
Slango, I believe is the term.
Yep, we're the slangoliers.
Yeah, there's I think we could just call it truant slang.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, Rodrigo came up with the idea.
Yeah, we just kind of went back and forth. I made a spreadsheet of common things that, let's just come out and say it, Shadowrunners would have lingo for. And we just kind of went back and forth. If there was, we would pitch things or come up with new ones and be like, oh, we should have something for actually escaping something that goes poorly. We should have something, or it's I think at one point we just had a lot of things that sounded very similar.
Yeah, I had a tendency. It was before my character had entered game. I was really into playing a Kenku, and I made way too many bird puns as part of that.
Yeah, we had
to tell me to tone down.
Yeah, we just naturally had because we had a seed run and we had a swan, which was a what was it? That's somebody who does it for the money. A swan was
a truant who does it for the money. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So then we had something else like a mark. Is what would you call that? And yeah, Sam pitched another bird thing, and I was like, let's do a fish thing this time. Although you had your really good one for a mark, I think was a doorknob.
Yeah, doorknob. I was pretty proud of that one.
I think that's fabulous. That's a great slang for a mark.
So a lot of times when I was thinking about it, I was thinking of how kind of from an etymology standpoint, how this kind of might morph. And so I thought of a mark as being someone who gets you in the door, he's your the weak point for your spy operation. And then I was like, well, you can shorten that to a doorknob. And our Mr. Johnson, so Shadowrun, the person who gives you the shady job is called Mr. Johnson. But I was thinking of who would give you the shady job in a more D&D themed version of Shadowrun, and so we came up with the innkeeper.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's great stuff. Having a slang in a setting does a lot to help add flavor. You mentioned Shadowrun, but also Planescape does that to good effect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, Sam and I both played in a Planescape game a long time ago.
Yeah, where the lingo was really a big part of it.
Yeah, it really was. I had to sit down and study it.
Yeah.
Here's one from our Twitter feed. Oh, where'd it go?
It's on the Twitter.
Yeah. If you were in combat and your brains got switched, which other character would you like to try? Also, Randus is the best.
I'd like to be Little Sparkle.
Yeah,
because I feel like Little Sparkle has that thing that she does where she's like, I have a small knife, tee-hee, and 9,000 points of damage.
Well, it's just I put it in the very precise places.
Right, and that's, I think that up to a point in that I am not the player ideally suited for those complex, if-then power statements. I don't think I'd ever build a character like that, and certainly Rodrigo would kill me if I tried to play one long term. But I think it would be great to play, if I had to choose one of us, I feel like Sparkle is the one that is probably closest to being applicable to my play style, because what Robin, Brian, and Steven do is just I got nothing, man. I'm just Kefaba Chinois. I got nothing.
Sam.
Yeah, that's funny because I was actually probably going to say that I would pick Sakaar because when Rodrigo recruited me, he's like, you're going to play a striker. I was like, okay. But my favorite role is actually defender. I like kind of being at the center of the action and taking the hits and, doing some crowd control. And I think wardens are actually a pretty neat class for that. And so I think it would be fun to switch things up.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to swap out.
Brian, who would you want to swap into?
I was actually thinking Sakaar myself as well.
Wow. Okay.
It's the dual swords. Chicks dig the dual swords.
He gets to turn into snake monsters and whatnot or whatever. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I think I would probably go with Randus because he tends to be the healer during combat.
Yes.
And I think it would be fun to switch from the position that I am in controlling people. Well, controlling is what I've really kind of latched onto in this last while. But then go into, okay, now it's time to go into protection mode and keep everybody alive while everyone else does the damage. So I'd probably go with that. Rodrigo, who would you flip into? I'd just flip the table and leave.
See, I actually really like warlocks, but I really hate cats.
We all hate cat, but
Yeah, no, you can stop there.
It's good. We're good. We got it. Everybody understands.
and of course Rob's not here to defend himself. He's out this week. So,
I would say actually I would really enjoy playing a character like Orym just because control is something that actually a lot of role-playing games don't have, and that 4th edition really codified and made more or less fair. But also that's just it's just interesting. It's interesting to be able to manipulate the battlefield, especially again because 4th edition gives you the squares, gives you the movement, gives you all this stuff, so you can be like, okay, well, I want to take options to restrict movement. I want to take options to to make it so my foes deal less damage. And the good thing about wizards is that you get a huge amount of powers to choose from that you then can make or build your spell book with.
Cool. Here's one from Kevin who says, I found your podcast a month or so ago. I'm 300 episodes behind. He's got a really long email here. So I'm going to cut to the 2 questions that he asks. My college friend and I have been playing a wide variety of RPGs almost every Saturday for about 10 hours for the last 5 years. Every Saturday for 10 hours.
Dang.
As you're probably thinking, that's quite a long session for such a regular meeting. Well, the thing is, at this point, some of us drive over an hour to get there, so we want the drive to be worth it. Now, here's the problem. My fiancée has joined us and enjoys playing, but the sessions are a bit long for her. Wouldn't be fair to ask everyone to cut the session by 4 hours for her, and I obviously don't want to say to just not come, and she doesn't want to stop coming either. I've said that it's not required for her to go, and she's taken up the offer on occasion. So my question is this. What are some things that can be done to make a long session feel shorter? We've had discussions trying to think up ideas and have instituted a set break, but are looking for more ideas. Yeah, I think taking a break every 2 hours is probably the best thing.
Yeah, that's
taking a break is
what
good.
I was going to suggest. I mean, would just doing it every other week maybe help out, or is it just once you hit so many hours,
Yeah,
she's
that's
just
a pretty
kind of
big marathon session.
Yeah.
I certainly understand where she's coming from there.
Yeah.
That was the sort of thing that I could do a lot easier in college than now.
Yes.
After 6 hours of a gaming session, I'm like, good.
I also wonder how long these breaks are, because maybe every hour you take a really quick 10-minute break, everyone refreshes a drink or gets a little something to snack and uses the bathroom. But then maybe at the 4 or 5 hour mark, you guys take let's take a long lunch break. Let's all sit around and get our minds off the game and socialize.
Yeah.
Maybe even play a real quick beer and pretzels game or something that's different, and then come back and play some more of your RPG game.
And then I would also suggest reconsider shortening the sessions. When we started doing Critical Hit, we had really, really long sessions.
Yeah, and we had some. When we originally started, we had a limit of 5 hours because we were doing it on a Wednesday afternoon, and I had to go pick up my kids.
When we started, we were doing it on the weekends.
And also on the weekends, Yeah,
when we were doing weekend sessions, we had pretty long sessions, but
all day Sunday.
But things changed. We had to change the schedule, and we just couldn't. And, again, it's not the same thing. Although I did used to drive half an hour to do a Critical Hit session. Things change. You add new people in and their schedule is different. You want to keep them, but, the length is a problem. Reconsider just shortening the session. Maybe instead of, 6 hours, it can be 4 hours, and, an hour there and an hour back is really not that crazy for 4 hours of entertainment.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I often find like the longer a session goes on, you kind of get diminishing returns.
Oh, yeah.
Because people get tired, people get frazzled, and like I think most fights that I've had in role playing games, like with the other players, as opposed to like battle scenes, have happened
Sure.
late in a session when everyone's tired and crabby.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
a session at one point when this was when Rodrigo was still here and Rob was still here, where literally all of us were falling asleep at the table.
Yeah.
And Rodrigo was like, okay, that's the end. We're going to take a break. Everybody wake up. We'll come back in a little bit. And then I think we only went a little bit after that. Now, most of our sessions on Wednesdays, if you see on our Twitter, we start about 7:30.
Mhm.
And then we're done somewhere between 10:30 and 11 o'clock. And we rarely now go past 11 o'clock. There were times when we would start at 7:30 and go until midnight or 1 o'clock, depending on if we were in the middle of a combat or something.
Right.
But now we keep it relatively short or average, I guess, compared to what we would have done in the past.
I mean, you could sort into sessions, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to go right home right then. You could hang out, play a different game while your wife decompresses from that, and
do something not game related. Game for 5 hours and hang or watch a movie or
Yeah, to have dinner after a game.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
play some beer pong, whatever. Well, not if you're driving home for an hour, but do something other than just play the game. Because I feel like 10-hour sessions are kind of the purview of like hyper caffeinated teenagers, and I say that as an old dude.
Well, how long, when you were in college, Matthew, how long did you guys play?
Oh, days. But we did stupid stuff too. I mean, at one point when I was GMing, I made a point of being just a little bit buzzed. And by that, I mean a couple of times I was totally plastered. I'm like, okay, you guys are fighting. You're fighting. Okay, they're rednecks, but they got swords, man. And, those are memorable sessions for reasons which may not be related to, enjoyability or playability. And I feel like 10 hours there are things that I love to do that I would not do for 10 hours. I mean,
Sure.
Yeah. Northwestern had this tradition called Reading Week, where there weren't classes for the week before finals, which usually, you were supposed to use it to study.
Yeah.
study.
And of course, our friends use it to be like dusk till dawn gaming sessions. So,
All right, so there are a bunch of other questions here. I am running a Pathfinder game, and combat tends to take a while. Any tips? Don't make them take so long.
well, no, I mean, it depends on. God, I mean, Pathfinder combat is complicated. So one tip I tried to implement myself, and I've seen used to very great effect in Pathfinder combats is called, weirdly enough, the dolphin effect. And you're trying to, so the idea is like dolphins just are constantly moving up and down. And so you just try to keep the combat moving. So like just go like straight from one person's action into another. And usually the good transition that I've seen used is like some description. So it's like, as the barbarian like lifts his axe and chops into the skeleton, which splinters into shattering pieces, the archer cocks their bow. What do you do, archer? And go from there and just keep things moving as much as possible, so that you don't have the downtime, because Pathfinder combat is complicated, and so you can do what you can to try to snip that out.
Sure, and I know that this happens to us all the time. Happens to me a lot. Do you have any ideas or tips for? Man, I've got so many powers and things that the combat instantly gets slowed down because someone's like, I need to spend 5 minutes looking at my character sheet to figure out which one of my spells or abilities is going to be best for this situation. Because is there a way to speed that up? Is there a way to make that faster?
One thing that is a good idea is like, keep track of the initiative as a GM and say like, all right, well, while, Rob is pouring over his actions, you can say, all right, Steven, you're on deck. So that you are trying to take, like that's not perfect because situations can change from round to round, but like, come up with a few ideas while it's not your turn. And then you should hopefully be able to like execute on them appropriately when it is your turn.
Yeah.
Other things is just having a lot of comprehensive notes. Pathfinder is really fiddly. And so the best thing is to have all your math kind of taken care of ahead of time. And that can be complicated by things like buffs. But you can have like a sheet that says like, here's my base attack. Here's my attack while I'm full attacking. Here's my attack when I'm full attacking and under the influence of this common buff. And that way you don't have to do the math fresh every time. And that's still, things are going to do ability damage to you. Things are going to like dispel your buffs, and you're going to have to pause to deal with that.
Right.
But if you really want to keep the combat short, you can try to minimize that stuff as much as possible.
Okay. Go ahead, Rodrigo.
Oh, and I think there's two things. As a player, you can always reorganize your notes. Write yourself a flow chart, write yourself if-then statements. If you're a wizard, you're not going to use, rope trick in every combat. So you don't need to go over rope trick every time you're going through your abilities. Mm-hmm. So it's like if we're fighting something that's bigger than us, these spells are probably most useful.
Right.
If we're fighting a bunch of little guys, these spells are most useful. And then as a game master, take some time to look at the things that you do, that the monsters that you use and the things that you use that slow combat down, and try to save those for birthdays and anniversaries.
Mm-hmm. I found, and again, it depends, I guess, if you're using pen and paper for your character sheet or if you're using some kind of a management system. Like, I use Hero Lab myself. I don't know what everyone else uses. But the nice thing about Hero Lab is when it's morning time and I have to pick my spells, I just put a check mark beside all the ones that I'm using for that day. And then when I go to my activity page or my campaign page, it's only showing me those spells. Mm-hmm. And I can quickly just hover over them, see what they do if I don't remember what they do. And that helps me out a lot. Also in Roll20, I think all of us have created macros down at the bottom of our screen that we can see what our current abilities are to roll. And so that may be another thing to help speed up combat decisions as far as what abilities and spells you're going to use. Let's see. It goes on and says, I've noticed the monsters out of the bestiary tend to do insane amounts of damage when they hit or have a very high hit bonus when they're at the party's level. Is there a balancing factor I'm missing, or is this how it's supposed to be? I guess this is also Pathfinder.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be, probably because players have buffs. Mm-hmm. So your owlbear has to be able to hit someone if they are just standing there, or if they have like mage armor and haste and all this other nonsense. And also, the game's more fun when the bad guys hit. So,
which brings us to our next question: how do the GMs handle character death? Do you give certain outs so a character can come back? Do you talk to the dying player between sessions? How about situations like Smith? Did Rodrigo talk to Brian Rob at some point and say, "Can I kill Smith?"
I only talked to Brian.
He talked to everyone but Rob. Is it okay if we kill Smith?
Yeah. Kill him.
Yeah, I think talking to the player between sessions is probably a good call. I think it just kind of depends on what kind of game you're wanting to play. If you want like that, high lethality, death counts kind of situation, then maybe resurrections and abilities to do so should be kept on the minimum. Or
I'll just for a game that I'm playing with Dr. Brad Will, and I was creating my character, and I spent a lot of time creating this character. Goes, you really should not have spent this much time creating your character, because I'm pretty sure your character is going to die in the first session. And that's just the nature of this particular game.
So that's important. That's a theme, right? That's something that game masters really need to think about when they start a game, is what are this game's overarching themes? Mm-hmm. And one of the obvious ones, especially if you're playing a high combat game, is what is death and how does that impact things? So in a game where that's important, you can remove things that would bring you back to life. In a game where it's not really supposed to matter that much, there are other themes that are more important. You can keep all that stuff. But D&D naturally, in its like natural state, in almost every incarnation, death is a minor inconvenience after like level 8. So it's if you are playing D&D out of the can, D&D is handing you the theme of like character death is actually not that big a deal. Just like drag the corpse to the cleric and they'll take care of it. Mm-hmm. It's gonna cost you, but again, it's an inconvenience. It's like, oh no, now I'm in debt, as opposed to now we need a new ranger.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that if you are playing a game where you really want death to be final, what I like to call the Valiant Universe theory, you do have to take into account that your player may have put as much work into your character as Steven did, and you need to make sure that they have a chance to deal with the fact that that they're aware of. First of all, this is a game where your wonderful shiny new wizard can die.
Part of the thing that I was told is, you should have flipped to this page, which had nothing to do with any of the character creation stuff, because it's talking about this world and how the game system works, and it says, because it's under the GM section, where it says characters should die in this game.
Right.
And so had the players known that, yes, maybe I would have taken a less...
now it's going to be so much more emotionally satisfying when your character dies and he's like, no,
so here's what happened.
My entire long-lost family, blah.
Yeah, I was in a fun bait-and-switch version of that game where I was like, we were playing a zombie apocalypse game, and I was told, all right, come up with a backup concept, you're probably going to die. And then my character died, and that's like when the real game starts.
Yeah, so I screwed up. So I screwed up even in making this character. He's like, spent too much time, and I was like, and then he said, your character's probably going to die on the first game anyway. I was like, fine. Basically, flipped the table, and I was like, I will just spend no time creating this character, and then the character lived in the campaign
forever.
There you go.
Barely.
A specific critical hit example that I think was really, really helpful to me is I didn't have a character die, but I did have a character that we had played for several years, never be heard from again. We don't say his name because he was never heard from again. But Rodrigo made a point of, I got the email, and the email said, okay, XYZ, and now we move on. And there was a very involved reworking of what the new character should be. And he said, these are the expectations. These are things you have to have. What do you want with this new character? What do you feel like you want to do? What would be fun? And we hashed out a new character that was in a different way, just as satisfying as the one that disappeared, who must not be named. And I think that's something to keep in mind too.
Must not be named, but
I won't name him. But this is the thing. Once that character leaves, it is going to be something. It can be traumatic. It can be upsetting. It can be, even if it's just, a minor, I put a lot of work into that. Having the ability to, okay, now the game is going to go on. Your guy is out of it. What do we do next? That's something you want to be prepared for, and you want to make sure that player is prepared for, so that you can come up with something just as awesome to keep doing.
If you guys are familiar with the Godlike RPG system, Brian, what do you think of it, particularly their rolling system? Are you familiar with that system?
With which one?
Godlike.
I haven't. Well, I got Monsters and Other Childish Things, which apparently uses like a version of the same underlying system to run roll engine. Wait, Godlike. Let me make sure.
Oh man, you may have stumped Brian.
Yeah. Godlike is the one rolling.
Yeah, you win a prize, right?
Godlike, not godless. That's. Let me make sure.
Now you're just making stuff up.
Maybe. Meanwhile,
no, that's the one I'm thinking of. The World War II gritty superhero thing. Yeah, and so the Monsters and Other Childish Things looks pretty neat, but I've never actually played it. Just read it. I never actually read Godlike, so I'm not sure how similar it is, or because I feel like the Monsters one is a little bit more streamlined. It seems interesting.
Okay. Here's somebody that says, anybody else familiar with the Godlike system?
Nope.
I am not.
I'm a master's of nursing program at a local college, and we're studying nursing theory. Did you know that there's a nursing theorist by the name of Dorothy Oram? Just thought I'd pass that along. Let's see.
I actually did know that.
Well, Orem is
it's a pretty common name.
It's like a town in Utah,
right?
Yeah,
it's a town in Utah too. Yes.
We're spelled different.
It's all the same.
I believe it's actually Dorothea Orem, but still, nonetheless.
Oh man. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, there's a long gap due to deleted emails, and then let's get down to here where this person says, "My question is, how do you deal with finding the balance between progressing the story and world consistency? For example, in a recent arc that he's playing, the path of destruction left by the Dawn's, or I guess our game, the Dawn's Arena was described as long and excessive, spanning multiple blocks, if not miles." This is when we crashed into the Dwarven city. We also know that the standing stones trapping the demons are both densely packed and fairly fragile. How is it that the crash didn't disrupt dozens, if not hundreds of those things, either through direct impact or by having pieces of the building follow them? I would think that the release of even just one sentient is somewhat dim troll would lead to the release of many others. Of course, one argues that until the dwarf golems were turned off, that they had a secondary function to hunt trolls that would take care of where all the golems and the trolls go, and why isn't a horde of them heading for our intrepid adventurers issue? So the real point here is not to overtax the DM, who has to convince himself in the consequences of the actions of party don't derail the long-term plot and warn certain follow-up things from happening. I don't know where the question is on this.
I think it's
picking and limiting consequences in art. It seems more like an essay. Too much realism, and it hurts the story. Too little of the same thing. Of course, it's a group dependent, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, I think what's happening here is that somebody had one of those like refrigerator moments, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, wait a minute. If Sakaar sneezing on one stone released an entire troll, how did the Dawn's Arenas crash not release 1,000 trolls?
Right.
And then continued with that logic to have a whole argument go on to excuse the potential plot hole and then turn it into a rumination on what it is to be a game master, which is great. I'm glad that we could do this for you, but I don't know what we can add to it.
Yeah.
So I think what you're really kind of looking at is you're looking at the basis of, like Rodrigo said, the themes of your story. You're looking at the causality versus the coincidence. Causality is everything tied together. Does everything a domino effect, or is it more realistic to have something, feel disconnected to where, you have these actions and sure, things happen, but they don't continue to happen because that's not how real life works. Sometimes things are messy and inconsistent and disconnected.
Or is it okay to have plot holes that are maybe not consequential to what the current elements of your story are and just kind of hand wave them away?
I think nowadays people are very liberal with the word plot hole. I think, something like this. And, it's like, I guess to a certain degree, I am like defending my logic about it. But it's like, you guys don't know exactly how the traps work explicitly. Right. You don't know if that particular trap had a particularly large and powerful troll. And that's why that's why Sakaar helped it to get out.
Or maybe it was the last in, first out.
I mean, this is a game with magic in it. There's lots of options, lots of reasons. It's maybe the crash was actually impactful enough that were there any trolls in any buckets that got hit by the crash, they got killed. Maybe it was too much jostle.
Yeah. I don't think that something that didn't happen is a plot hole. No. And I think that's the kind of thought that I love that people have, because the people will ask me questions like, hey, when this episode happened and all of these things, and I feel like Shatner being asked the combination of Kirk's safe in episode 75. And on the one hand, it's wonderful. And on the other hand, I'm like, well, that didn't happen. So I don't know how to address it. I don't know how to say anything other than that didn't happen.
Let's go to an email question. If you were to create a source book, not email, a Twitter question. If you were to create a source book for the worlds you have created, what worlds would you use and what would you include?
Well, if we did a Void Saga source book, it would probably be mostly relating to the Central Continent, the Astral Sea, the Feywild, the places where we have been, with maybe some discussion of the places where we haven't been that I have notes for, which are actually really just the Eastern Continent, the Shadowfell, and the Elemental Chaos. But also, sometimes I'll put articles online about Critical Hit, and it'll be written like a source book. It's like, here's this like very concise and plain information about what's going on. But that's not the way that my notes exist. This is me actually sitting down and writing all this stuff out. So putting together a Critical Hit source book would involve like me actually writing out things that have been a part of the game forever that just exist as bullet points. It's like dot astral sea burn your face when fall in. It's like there's no like concise paragraph that describes exactly how it happens or why.
Here's one from Kyle who says, my question is for Stephen, Brian, and Rob. In your current session of the Void Saga, after the Council of Gods meeting was over, why did none of you ask to speak to Corlon to see how Torque was doing? He was never heard from again?
That's okay.
Plus, we are kind of pressed for time.
Plus, wasn't Corlon dead, or am I thinking of someone else?
Corlon,
Bahamut's.
He's the one that kind of decided to sit out the vote or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Corlon swerved.
He's doing his own thing.
Yeah.
Yep. That's from Kyle. What else we got here?
Also, I'm just gonna tell you right now, Corlon does not know everything that's going on in the Feywild, because that would be inimical both to the Feywild and Corlon's nature.
Yeah, I don't need
keep track of
Corlon
things.
spying on Orm every time he goes and does stuff.
Yeah.
Gosh. Let's see. When you guys make a new character, what's the driving force for your choices? Party compatibility, cool idea you wanted to do? How do you feel? Or how do you feel that day?
B and C. Definitely B and C, with a heavy dose of B, but probably more C.
I would say I probably steer pretty hardly towards A. I, try to make sure that there's a cohesive, a balanced party, and don't want to step into one spotlight too much.
Yeah, I want to make sure all the roles are covered. I don't want to be doing the exact same thing as someone else.
Yeah.
And have 3 people playing rogues and no one playing a healer.
Play a rogue healer.
You could totally do that.
Maybe cool idea. I think it's probably A and B. It's first cool idea. What sounds like a cool character? And then does it fit with the party? And if it doesn't, then I have to do something else.
See, I don't know. I think in some ways, at least from a game master perspective, the challenge of having that weirdo, offbeat, strange character can be fun, can be kind of a game maker in and of itself. I mean, it's definitely difficult. I mean, we at one point were playing a standard Dungeons and Dragons round, and one kid wanted to be a kid named Eddie who had a motorcycle from Chicago who got swept through a vortex. And I'm like, dude, we've all seen the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon.
Also, Rocky Horror.
Right, and we let him do it. And it ended up working, and that character died rather quickly.
Also, Rocky Horror.
Well, the character died rather quickly on my part because he was a pain in the butt. But the fact remains that while that was in play, it wasn't terrible. It was something that it definitely changed the game, and it changed my conceptualization of the game. But that difficult to establish, difficult to integrate character was actually something challenging, something different to work with, and it was kind of neat in its own way.
Yeah, so I think one of the good ways, to think of the role-playing game character creation is not just as a stats, but also almost like a TV show. You kind of have, Rob jokes about this all the time about him being the Green Ranger, and that's not a bad way of thinking about things. What is your role in the dynamic? You don't want everyone to be the weird guy, because then unless you do, but then that's a very different sort of game. But otherwise you're going to get 2 people trying to out weird each other, or and then that can be a conflict, because it's no, I wanted to be the barbarian that doesn't know anything about anything.
Yeah. And that happens. That really does happen. I've listened to enough RPG podcasts where everybody wants to be the comedian of the group, and it doesn't necessarily work. And I'm talking about their players are the comedians of the group, and not, the stoic or something like that. One of my favorite things about DMing is world creation, although sometimes I may go into too much detail. What are some times you perhaps went overboard with world building, and any tips for world creation? Oh, man, I need to look it up. Somebody else answer this. I'm going to look up this book, because there is a great book that you guys need to read about world building. And let me look it up really quick. Brian, roll with it.
Well, man, I don't know if it can be very difficult, because players can always just pick, if you try to come up with options for if they do A, B, or C, they'll invariably choose D. That's why I generally try to design broadly, but they'll always surprise you, and then you have to make stuff up anyways.
I think, Rodrigo, you were pretty short on yours, right? Fall into the Astral Sea, you get your face burned off.
I mean, it depends. If you think about it, the the carnival feel of the Toad's Boardwalk is it's very specific, and you guys have been in other carnival type places, and they were different, right? So that's very specific world building, but it's targeted. Times where I've gone overboard, I don't ever feel that you can go overboard unless you are actively neglecting things that your world needs. Is if you don't have any religious structure or reason why no religious structure exists, and you're sitting down and writing about what exactly the ratio is between reed and clay that people used to build their houses, you're delving too much into it.
Yeah,
that said,
go on.
Sorry. Yeah, that said, if you do have that down, as an example, in my Exalted game that I'm running right now, I have several entries of local vegetables, both real and fictitious, and how they interact with the world and how local tribes use them. So it's that's not something that anybody necessarily cares about until somebody cares about it.
What I was going to say is the only thing that I think world building can get in the way of sometimes is when someone's basically writing a story. You just want to make sure that you're not I've been in some games where the world is so pristine, or the worst of these is actually not even a world building exercise so much as someone who's building a game based on a real world setting and is trying to maintain authenticity, and will pause game when someone asks a question to look up the real thing, and that is killer for me because it just slows down game immensely, and it's just that's if you want to build your have your game set in the modern day or have your game set in Dark Ages Spain, cool, but you need to have everything that you really care about on hand, or then
Dark Ages Spain.
I don't care.
Well, so when we did the what was the Shadows game that we just ran, Brian, that you did? Urban Shadows. Yeah. We set that in Hays, Kansas, but there's so much of the stuff that went on in that world, a lot of locations that either don't exist or haven't existed there for a long time, or everyone's collective consciousness is thinking of something close, but maybe it's 5 blocks over from the way it's described, and we're okay with that. And so I think you can be a little loose in your world building and maybe make it up as you go. There are 2 good books that you should check out. The first one is, and I really enjoyed this one, The Kobold Guide to World Building by Scott Hungerford and Chris Pramis and a bunch of other ones. The other one is called Doopy Doopy Doo, How to Build a Universe from the Infinite, what's those guys? The Infinite Monkey Cage. Yeah, an Infinite Monkey Cage book from Brian Cox and Robin, what's his name? Ince, INCE. So go and look for that, How to Build a Universe and The Kobold's Guide to World Building. I've read both of those and I enjoyed them immensely. And they, especially The Kobold's Guide to World Building, takes things and says, okay, how do you build something from the macro level to the micro level? And then how do you build something from the micro level to the macro level? And do you need to get caught up in all of these little twists and turns, or is it okay to fudge it a lot at the time? Some people are like, oh no, there's a bunch of different essays in this book. And there are some people that are like, oh no, always start by drawing a map of your world and then go from there. So it's really a good perspective and a bunch of different perspectives on how you can do some world building. So go check that out.
Nice.
Let's see. One question. If you guys wiped next episode and had to completely roll new characters, what would you make? Something in a whole different system.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know. I'm very interested in, after I've been playing that Shadowrun video game, I'm interested in playing the actual game. I don't know if that would be fun or not, but...
Shadowrun's such a pain.
It's a huge pain. All the 10s in the world.
One of these days, I'm going to have to get Shadowrun Anarchy just to see if that...
What would you roll up?
Scratches an
Would you
itch.
roll up, Brian? I always joke Bard for me, actually, but if it has to be in D&D.
If it has to be in D&D.
Yeah, so like in the Void Saga, you guys
Okay.
get all wiped out. Everybody gets, so here are the rules. Everybody gets wiped out, but you still have to maintain roles.
okay.
You don't have to maintain your role, but somebody has to pick up that role. So Steven
Right.
calls Bard, that takes a leader.
Yep.
What
I
is-
call
what-
Wizard.
Is divine character still off the table, or
Oh, nope, whatever. We'll make it work.
Avenger?
Okay.
I must avenge the death of one
And then-
Orm Rivendorn.
And then,
You have killed my father. Prepare to
Matthew
die.
wants Wizard, so that's controller. That leaves Defender and potentially another striker open.
Just resurrect Sakaar and play him.
Man, because I was gonna grab Scion because I thought it would be cool considering we just introduced
Oh.
Psionics. But if Matt's
Yeah,
playing...
you don't want to play an epic level Scion in 4th edition.
Scion
Oh, I
Gif.
think I do.
Oh man,
Sounds like a challenge.
Oh,
it's
boy.
your character cards are going to be 37 pages.
I know. I'm so excited about it.
Did they make a psychic
There's
defender?
so many little levers you can fiddle with. It could do a beacon at will, but it could also be an epic level power. You don't even have any idea what it does. I would just, I think you get to win if you give the GM a nosebleed, typically. So,
Yeah.
well, then I
but-
Well,
rolled
there are
episode
there are
6.
fight brains. You can play a battle mind.
yeah, it's
Oh,
true.
there's
But but I don't know. Outside of psionics, I don't know. Maybe like a barbarian.
Ooh.
That could be fun.
You have mentioned that you wanted to play Conan, that RPG. So yeah, that's
The
interesting.
Conan RPG is sweet.
Is it?
Yeah.
I've not looked at any of the 2D20 system stuff.
Yeah, the best part of the Conan RPG is definitely the downtime rules where like just stuff happens and then you it's basically between games you're assumed to go carousing and like get into trouble and then you roll some dice to see what form of trouble you get into. Which is like, oh yeah, you wake up drunk in an alley with a weird tattoo. You don't know what it means. Like, cool, that's amazing.
It's of a snake. There's nothing bad about snakes in this world.
No, nothing. It doesn't mean like set cultists are going to try to murder you and sacrifice you to their dark god.
Yes.
Here's another Twitter question. How audience-driven is your process, DM and party? Do you guys focus on having a fun game for the participants and then allow the audience to piggyback on your enjoyment? Or is there an active consideration for the audience? And if so, how much? So from the producer standpoint, two things to keep in consideration. The main rule that I have at the table from the producer standpoint is no bad language. Other than that, I don't care, and we're all here to have fun. From the editing side, when I go back through, then it's like, let's remove all the stuff that is not story dependent, right? So if there's suddenly a 5-minute jag where someone's talking about, some big wrestling move that happened last week, that doesn't need to be in that show. So
Yeah,
then it
Brian.
becomes yes, Brian, please knock it off.
Okay.
So yes, then those sections have to be taken out because that is taking the audience, the listener, out of the story that we're trying to tell. Also big, sometimes there's a big long, as I was talking about earlier in this particular show, if I'm spending 5 minutes trying to figure out how a power works or my power works, and it's not advancing the story and it's boring for me listening to it, I know it's going to be boring for the audience to listen to it. So let's cut out this, let me look, should I do this? Should I do that? Let's just cut out the part where you go and, okay, here are my two choices of powers. Let's have a little discussion if that's a question and then get right to it instead of drawing that out really, really long. So from the producer and editor standpoint, that is my process. Now, Rodrigo, you may have a different, or Brian or Sam, you guys may have different ideas when it comes to the audience, but I think we're here first to just play a game and let the audience listen in.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely approach the game from a very story-driven, hopefully, a pretty cinematic way of thinking about the game. What makes for good storytelling, what makes for good scenes, what makes for good character development, what lets the characters shine. And as it happens, that tends to be enjoyable by the audience, not just by the players, because the players obviously get a very direct rush from somebody being like, aha, Tesorum Rivendorn. a person that actually exists in this world and is important, but the audience does want to see those characters, succeed and fail and have trials and tribulations. So as it turns out, just running a pretty decent, Dungeons and Dragons game is enjoyable for the audience, especially when Steven comes in with the shears and, prunes the crap out of it. Like me saying that, for example, to make it, flow a little better, to remove the, extraneous noises and conversations and whatever. That really helps a lot. Now, as far as feedback, I incorporate very little. If you have ever sent me an email saying, hey, what would be cool if you did this, then my first instinct is to explicitly not do that. And then my second instinct is to be like, well, let's not do it for that reason. That said, there have been people that have accurately guessed what I was getting at or what I was trying to do.
Right.
Someone nailed it with the Legacy of Ghosts.
Yeah. Pretty early on. And I remember, we split the party in Celestial Crusade, and somebody was like, I bet we're gonna get the Holy Rollers mixed in here, and sure enough, we did. And it's like, stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not gonna be like, well, no, now I'm not doing this because it's a important structural part of the game. It's like if you successfully guess that it's purgatory, don't spend another season telling me that it's not, and then go back that it is. Yeah.
I think as a player, though, I have made decisions differently in this game that I have in some other games, and I think part of that is just Rodrigo's game. I mean, you want to be on your A game. You want to be up to the storytelling that's going on, and so certain decisions that I may have made that would have been more selfish in a game where I was just playing for my own entertainment, I might have strayed away from in favor of something that does feel more cinematic, that does feel more story driven. And I know I'm going to get naysayed and poo-pooed on this, but I really work hard sometimes in Critical Hit to not make all the references and stupid jokes that come to me, because A, it's disruptive, B, they're not all funny, and C, I think this is most importantly, sometimes if I just leave it alone, someone else will make the stupid joke for me. And the real triumph is when it's Rodrigo. And true. I mean, there are moments playing this game where I'm like, I would never have done that in a game that I was running, or I would never have done that in a game where I felt like my only concern is my player and how my character works. But whether it's the setting or whether it's the medium, for some reason I feel like we do, or at least I do, act in more of a what makes for a better overall story.
And then, of course, the times when Matthew does have horrible jokes, I just edit those out, and you guys don't ever hear them, and that makes the show better. Which brings up Gordon's follow-up question.
Not every time.
That's not funny.
Oh no! I take out. I live in Matthew's bad jokes, especially when Sam just totally rips on him.
Yeah.
Those are the best.
I'm glad
Sam, did you have a follow-up on that, on how you approached your game?
I was saying when I was running Weird Western, periodically it was actually. I had an arc that I knew I wanted, but it was sometimes helpful to read comments and feedback from things, because it let me know when there was something that I hadn't really explained well enough, or if there was a character that people specifically wanted to see more of. Initially, I hadn't had any plans of going into the swamp where the lizard folk lived, but Rob seemed to want it, and then listeners seemed to want it, and I was like, okay, I can add that in. So I did.
Yeah. So here's Gordon's follow-up question. Do you consider the podcast to be chiefly consumed weekly as it is released, or binged? Is there a consideration towards either of those methods of consumption? The show has always been designed to be chiefly consumed as a weekly podcast, right? Mm-hmm. Because it goes back to the old radio serials that I grew up listening to. And you always had this, there's this cliffhanger that takes us to the next week. I want to hear what happens next week. I don't mind binging. In fact, For those of you that listen to one of our other podcasts, the Major Spoilers podcast, I've really come around to appreciating really short seasons that can be binged over the course of a week or 5 days or whatever that may be. So I understand that some people who are coming in late to the show will sit there and just listen 8 hours a day to Critical Hit, and that's great. That's wonderful. I think sometimes, though, there may be something lost in the way that we deliver this show if it's binged, in that, oh my gosh, I have to wait a whole week to find out what happens to Randus, or I have to wait a whole week to find out what happens to Little Sparkle and her friends. And I think there's some benefit to having it in that serialized edition. If we wanted to, we sit down and we record 2 to 3 episodes when we sit down to record, right? And so if we wanted to release just that full 3.5 or 4 hour session, we could, but then you'd only be getting 1 episode a month. And that may be not fun on the same way. So I like something that's regular. I like something that every Saturday morning I can wake up and know that show is there for people to listen to. So from my standpoint, I've always considered this to be a weekly show. That being said, we basically binge record a bunch of shows. So it goes both ways. Yeah. Do you guys have any considerations on whether someone should record, I'll give you guys a head up and a little behind the scenes. Right now we're recording more shows that you guys will hear in the very far future. But we're going to have all those shows recorded, and I'm very seriously considering releasing that big bulk of shows all at once to certain Patreon levels on our Patreon page so that they can hear it, months ahead of time. We did that with the Yellow Sign a couple of years ago, where everyone who was a patron, I think at the $25 level and higher, they got access to that show almost a year before everyone else heard it. And so there was something maybe to that binge. But Matthew or Rodrigo or Sam or Brian, do you guys have any thoughts or ideas on a binge release of shows?
I operate on a very, very strict no binge rule. And it's really weird because this is one of the few things that I have just immense self-control about. If you've ever heard me talk ever, you can tell that I'm not necessarily a super disciplined person, but there are a few things in life that I am absolutely rock solid, disciplined, psychotic about certain things. And one of them is don't binge shows. Don't binge things if you can avoid it. And the main reason for that is when you read something and it takes a week or a month or, a year with Doctor Who before you get the next one, you have time to kind of grind and ruminate, and you have time to assess and assimilate that information before the next one gets there. If you sit and you binge something, bamity, 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 bam, 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 I feel like you lose a lot of the nuance and you lose the ability to really assimilate and to really break down and assess what you're reading. And I feel like in my thought process, and again, if you want to binge shows or binge Critical Hit, more power to you. I am not judging you. You are a wonderful person. Yay. But for me, I feel like it's the equivalent of too much junk food. It's, a huge bag of M&Ms, which kind of undermines the whole point of enjoying chocolate to me. So
Well, I wouldn't say that Critical Hit is junk food. I would say Critical Hit is more like that 22-pound steak that they want you to eat.
Sean Candy ate in
order to win the prize, right? It's like,
including the gristle and fat.
This is too good of a steak to eat at one setting. You have to, little bits and bites at a time. So
absolutely,
yeah. I this was always intended to be a serialized release. That's why we have been 10 years, 500 episodes, and we have been weekly, except for we release 50 episodes a year. I don't know if there are other podcasts that release. I mean, I'm sure there are, but are that regular? I know that there are some that have been around much longer than we have that will do a burst of like 10 shows, and then they'll be quiet for 3 months, and then come back and do another burst of like 10 shows, and that's fine. But I like to be that person that's there for you every Saturday morning when you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do today? Hooray! Critical Hit is here for me. My good old friends over at Critical Hit. I love these guys so much.
Well, and the other thing is that binge watching and binge consumption of media has risen around serialized media anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not much that we need to change for, or not much about Critical Hit that I feel really gets in the way of people binging it. I feel that when you find out what happened last time
on Critical Hit. See, some people are paying attention, Matthew.
I had my mute on.
Wow, first
muted.
time, ladies and gentlemen. Mark that down.
All right, I'm going home and I'm taking a nap. Steven's been mean to me 2 questions in a row.
This is exactly the sort of thing that gets cut out.
No, not really. Not if it's a good burn like that.
Funny banter.
Hilarious. Anyway. It's like I'm not even running the game and it's still happening. Next question.
Yeah, no, that's the. I think that's the last question that we had. I would say that certainly we have a great many supporters over the years, and certainly appreciate all the support that you've given us, either through the iTunes podcast or the Apple Podcasts feedback, or sending us emails directly, or using the comment section over at Major Spoilers for individual episodes. I really, really like seeing people comment there. And we certainly, all of us, certainly appreciate everyone who's a patron over at patreon.com/Major Spoilers, because your support allows us to ensure that we can record shows when we have a person on, in Chicago, and a person that's in Seattle, and a person that's in Las Vegas, and a person that's in Topeka, Kansas, to where we can still all create a game and have this experience that we share with you. And we certainly couldn't do it without the support of our patrons. So if you would like to see this show continue far into the future, maybe hit episode 1000 in another 10 years, then please head over to patreon.com/Major Spoilers, and your contributions, even if it's $1 a month, $12 a year, that goes a long way, especially if we get all of our listeners to do that. And the other thing that I would say is, if you like this conversation, if you like having your questions answered, but you'd like it in a more real-time format, one of our future goals that we have over at patreon.com/Major Spoilers is a monthly live chat where you would be able to watch the live stream, ask your questions in real time, and get these kind of questions back from us. It'd be all in video and all that good stuff. That is a future upcoming goal that we are getting closer to every day that we add a new patron. So that would be a whole monthly new bit of Critical Hit programming for you. It's called the GM Roundtable. Be on the lookout for it when we get closer to that goal. Any other comments or remarks? Brian, we can find you at D&D Brian.
Yep.
Sam, we can find you at Samantha Nelson 1. That's the number 1. Matthew is at Mighty King Cobra. Rob is at Boar Immortal. And who am I forgetting? Rodrigo is Fearsome Critter. And of course, I'm at Major Spoilers. Did I forget anyone? I don't think so. Except for you, dear listener. And until we meet again, here's hoping all of your dice rolls are critical hits.
This podcast is copyright 2019 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.